which is the same building, same place that houses Lutheran World Relief. So if anybody have those kinds of connections as well. But I'm so glad to be here today and to be able to share a little bit, not only of LIRS, but I'm honored to be with my colleagues in ministry there in Leopold with the ELCA Gift Planners, the Foundation, and also with Kathy Chatelain from the Synod office here in Southeast Minnesota. Thank you again, Pastor Carl Eric, for hosting us today, and the meal. I'm thinking I've got 3 meals out of this, so this is amazing. So please keep eating and enjoying while we talk. We're also going to encourage some discussion later on. I just at my table just sharing a little bit about some of the ministries that several congregations have been involved with, either over time or currently. So we want to hear from you as well and see where there are other good connections. What can we do moving forward? Where's the vision happening? So just a little bit about history of LIRS. We're 83 years old, 83 years of welcome, and we do call it the long welcome, not just because we're 83 years old, but because we believe passionately that when people do come as either immigrants, asylum seekers, or refugees, that we stay with them for the duration, and they become really part of the fabric, part of the family. I have a story later on that I want to share just about what happened during this last year during some of our Afghan resettlement, and that moves from generation to generation. But just a little bit of a brief history. We actually got started in 1939. And it was really sponsoring Lutheran pastors and their families post-World War II. And started in 1939 and then continued through the war. And subsequently then, again, welcoming displaced Lutherans from Germany and Eastern Europe up through the early 50s. In 1959, we actually moved to welcoming some of our the refugees. Oops, I think I'm doing this right. Okay. Yeah, welcoming refugees from Cuba when that was taking place. Again, just giving you some of the history of humanitarian crisis. 1972 Uganda, 1975 Vietnam, and again here truly in Minnesota. How many of the Hmong Vietnamese and Thai families were resettled during those years in many congregations around here. Certainly then going to the crisis in Central Africa or Central America in the 1980s. Then the Bosnian and Albanian crisis, the lost boys and girls from Sudan, and then into the 1990s, Burma, Tibet, Bhutan, Iraq, and Thailand. And then in the 2000s, again, Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. So LIRS has been involved in those kinds of resettlement humanitarian crisis since the beginning, and we continue to do that. For those of you who are unfamiliar, this kind of work has evolved a little bit over the 80 years. We certainly have seen the shifting landscape of immigration and global crises, but the Lutheran community has been a powerful force of good here in America. And it's because of you, and many of you have stemmed from congregations, that legacy of embracing immigrants and refugees that intertwines with the very foundations of this country. Again, just some of the pictures from the past with our work that began with Lutheran communities offering safe haven to other Lutherans fleeing Europe. That calling expanded in such an incredible way, to the point that Lutherans and many others are opening their hearts and homes to refugees and immigrants of all faiths and ethnicities. And so I want to emphasize that, all faith, all ethnicities. It's not exclusively Lutheran or even Christian. Again, just going back to the Cuban airlift, when Fidel Castro overthrew Cuba's dictatorship and imposed the communist government in 1959, there were over 100,000 Cuban refugees that arrived in Florida, and the LIRS was invited to assist in their resettlement. It's very interesting, some of those same places that were, again, taking in these 100,000, if you can imagine, just the number of boats, the number of people trying to make that passage across. Some of those same refugee partnerships and affiliations are there today, whether it be from Miami to Jacksonville, to all points in Florida. That's really where they got started. Certainly we understand the defeat of South Vietnam by North Vietnam in April of 1975. It triggered that flood of refugees I referred to before from Southeast Asia. Within weeks, LIRS went from a 4-staff operation to one with more than 100 staff members. Can you imagine? From 4 to 100 in just several weeks. And I was sharing this story, one of my predecessors at LIRS, I actually was in college at St. Olaf at the time, and maybe some of you can relate to this, because that happened right at the beginning of the summer. They contacted most of the Lutheran colleges to see if they had college students to help recruit congregations to help house these 100,000, there were 16,000 refugees LIRS resettled, but there were over 300,000 that came from Southeast Asia with about 3 to 4 months with the fall of Saigon. And so that's, maybe you were part of a congregation that got called and said, would you host this family? Would you be part of that process? In 1993, the first survivors of what we would call the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, the former Yugoslavia, arrived in the U.S. for resettlement. In 1999, 1,700 ethnic Albanians were forced out of Kosovo into Macedonia and eventually were resettled by LIRS. And I don't know how many of you may have heard in the news, there are now tensions growing again in Kosovo. There were some blockades of some of the roads, just in terms of some of that nationalistic, ethnic kind of uprising is happening again. And so, again, we try to look at what is happening around the world. Where are the refugee hotspots? Where are the places that are most likely to erupt in the next time period? So LIRS has resettled so many more displaced groups in the years that have followed, and today our work has expanded beyond refugees to include support services for migrants at our southern border, and most recently with the fall of Kabul and the war in Ukraine. Our work at the border, we are one of only 2 organizations recognized by the U.S. State Department to actually reunite children and families, and so that's been a major part of our work actually for the last 8 years, working fervently. Obviously, there have been hindrances, and I know that Kathy will speak to some of this in a little later on. In terms of reuniting children and families, unaccompanied children, we're one of the 2 organizations that can work with unaccompanied refugee minors. We call them URMs, unaccompanied refugee minors, so that's a term you might hear. Interestingly enough, most children that come across the southern border, 85% have either a parent or relative or sponsor already here in the United States. That's not a fact that much of the media ever wants people to know, but they already have that kind of a relationship. So part of our role, and again, this got halted during the last administration significantly, but we are very much involved in again, doing the fingerprinting, doing the background checks to make sure that we're safely reuniting children with the right relative, with the right person, which has then also created, again, an overflow of children in some of our foster care, transitional foster care kinds of partnerships around the country. But we are called to do this. This is the humanitarian piece that we need to be a part of. When Krish, our president CEO, went down to the border, it was actually 2 years ago, and went to one of the detention centers, she was appalled because these are mostly for-profit detention centers. If you've heard the name of Heartland, Heartland is a for-profit detention center that doesn't have a heart. And we emphasize the fact that we are the ones with heart. But she saw children in detention, and she kept commenting, why don't they have shoelaces on their shoes? Or they're housing them like they would prisoners in a jail cell, right? You don't never have shoestrings because of potential of suicide. And so they were taking shoelaces away from children. So one of our big efforts at that point was making sure children had shoes and that they weren't going around barefoot and susceptible to even more disease. So we know that this is the right thing to do, because at the core our Lutheran community is one rooted in our own rich immigration story. And we as the staff are honored to serve as that Lutheran front force. You don't have to turn very far, or you just turn on your television to know why this work has never been more important than it is today. Because right now in this country, fundamental Lutheran values are being threatened. Core Lutheran values, core Christian values, core interfaith values, basic human values are being really cast aside. Children are being warehoused in prison-like facilities, as I said, and dying from curable diseases in the U.S. custody. Leaders are threatened to reinstate family separation as the strategy to scare families from even attempting to come while they are seeking violence and seeking refuge. So we all know the term refugee, but for our purposes, we just want to define a few things just to make sure we're all on the same page. LIRS is one of 9 resettlement agencies here in the United States recognized by the State Department to do refugee resettlement. But what are the steps that are involved? And just for your edification, there are close to 80 million refugees in the world today. 80 million. Just to give a little context, there are only 35 countries that are recognized by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees to accept refugees. And so if you're just even thinking about those numbers, 80 divided by 35 million, and up until the past administration, the ceiling for refugees coming into this country was usually between 85 and 95,000, all right? What is that in terms of the number of refugees there are in the world? And of course, we saw that number just decimated during the past administration. We still aren't back up to the numbers that we know and hope will be forthcoming in the next year. And that's by a presidential decree in terms of the number of refugees. Another interesting fact is, when did we have the most refugees resettled here in this country? And that was actually under the Reagan administration, where we were accepting up to 95,000 refugees a year. So it's always been really, up until now, it's always been a bipartisan, it doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democratic kind of administration that's in. And so, again, this is a human and an American core value. So step 1 is a family flees, or an individual flees their country because of persecution or fear of all kinds of things that might be happening, as Pastor Carl Eric, you mentioned in your prayer. But the step 2 is that you have to register with the High Commission, the United Nations High Commissions on Refugees, and that can take time. For people who are fleeing, as you can well imagine, fleeing, they may not have time to get paperwork. They may not have time to get a birth certificate or any kind of documentation of who they are. And so that whole process takes many, many months. And so people sit in refugee camps, sometimes up to 12, 15 years. Families are born in refugee camps. Families are expanded in refugee camps by the time this process goes through. And so the resettlement process includes interviews for security screenings. As one of our board members, Diane Batchick, says, the people who are vetted through refugee resettlement are the most vetted people in the world. They are probably the safest people to allow into your neighborhood. So then there's other additional kinds of things for approval, more security screenings, and then hopefully the journey to the United States or another country that is recognized to accept and then welcomed here in the United States. It's been our history at LIRS to pair each refugee and each refugee family with a partner and a community that is uniquely equipped to meet their needs. We certainly have partners all across the country that do this work. Each city has different strengths that make them right, or maybe the right fit for different types of refugee household. Our partners on the ground meet our refugees at the airport and then take them to an apartment that hopefully has been prepared for them, refrigerators stocked with culturally sensitive kinds of food, the pathways for this is how we get your children enrolled in school, this is how we get you enrolled in ESL classes if that's be the needs. But our partners do this, and just to share a real quick story that happened within the last year and a half. We opened an office in Fargo, North Dakota. Unfortunately, Lutheran Social Services of North Dakota no longer could function, and they had a really strong refugee resettlement program out of the Fargo office. We were able to hire most of that staff in order to continue the critical work of refugee resettlement. And so it was just about a year ago, the story emerged of a family from the Democratic Republic of Congo who had been in a refugee camp for 12 years, awaiting arrival, awaiting that final word that yes, they could come. They had been told that they were going to be coming to the United States. And so the parents and 8 children were on a flight. They had 2 suitcases between all of them. 2 suitcases, that was all they had. And they arrived in Fargo. And the sister of the husband, father of the family has been here in the United States for some time. She was there along with the volunteers and the staff from the Fargo, North Dakota office to welcome them. And balloons and tears and just an incredible feeling that this family was finally here. 4 of those children had been actually born in the refugee camp. And so they were welcomed to that apartment, actually 2 apartments, because we needed that much housing for all the children. And that family now is doing very, very well. So just a good news story of that kind of welcome here to the United States. So we know that that these are the stories that really mean something. And so we've actually turned oftentimes to some of our refugee families and migrants living here in the United States to foster this message of hope and advocate for even more change, which is sorely needed. Sometimes, well, we know these individuals are sometimes better equipped than anyone to speak about the struggles and the resilience of refugees and migrants in America. And so we know that the struggles don't end just because they arrive. That's why LIRS is here for the long welcome, long beyond that welcome at the airport. So we'd like you to hear a little bit of this story. Wilma Collins. I think I'm doing this right.
Yes. My wife said, I think we should go to America. How do we go there? We don't have any money. She said, well, let's go to Montana. I said, you got to make up your mind. We ought to go to America. We go to Montana. She said, well, Montana is in America. I was a teacher by then when the war started. I was teaching at the SOS Children's Village. My year got engulfed in a brutal civil war, one of Africa's most brutal civil war. In the first 3 months of that war, about 250,000 Liberians lost their lives. And the only thing we found was a tube of toothpaste on the ground, and we picked it up, and that's what we ate. And going back home to my mom without anything. And then we got stopped by the rebels. They were questioning my wife, and I had to stand quiet. And then he pointed to me, he said, who's that? Is that your man? And my wife said, yes. He said, you're lucky today. You guys are lucky. I'm done killing for the day. Get out of here. And as frail, as hungry as we were, we started running. And I talked to my mom. I said, hey, we're all leaving tomorrow. We'll go to the port and we'll get on board that ship. We prayed about it. And then the next morning, my mom said, no, the Lord is not leading me. I'm not going. But you know, I give it all to my mom because she is unwavering. And we prayed, we go to church. You know, I'm a Methodist. But my mom, prayer, I think it was through her prayers that we were able to survive this. Sometimes I question God. Why are we going through this? We believe in you. I question. My mom never. She believed it was his doing and he will deliver us. Yeah. I get a little emotional sometimes. My first job I got was within 1 month of me coming into this country. That's Montana. That's Helena. Now, give me a reason to leave. I don't have it.
That's a powerful story. Wilmot Collins became the mayor of Helena, Montana. He also credits that within the first month, he decided that he was going to go to the state capitol building, and so he walked up the steps to the state capitol building, and he said, you know, I want to meet the governor. And so he walked towards the governor's office, and anyway, this gentleman stopped him in the hallway, and he said, hello, who are you? And Wilmot introduced himself, and he said, I'm here to see the governor. And he goes, well, I'm the governor. And so Wilmot got a chance to tell his story early on, but it is the story that we need to keep talking about and to help others find their Helena. So families, again, when they come, they literally have nothing but the clothes sometimes on their backs. Many of them are asylum seekers who, like the refugees we serve, have fled their home countries, fearing for their lives. We've, again, had some trips to the border over time to help tell those border stories in addition to stories like Wilmot Collins, and just incredible ways that we are, again, hoping to continue to serve. A significant number of individuals have been apprehended at the border over these last years, and so we're part of that disaster relief that Kathy will talk about in a little bit too, with some of our border servant corps ministries. Our work with children and families doesn't stop there. We, again, making sure that children crossing the border have some sort of a relationship. They sometimes make that dangerous trip on their own with the promise of reuniting here, and so that's part of our incredible work. I love this quote. This little girl, she at one point during her time with us colored a picture of Nemo from Finding Nemo and said that she felt like she was Nemo when she and her dad were separated. Actually, the good news is that she and her dad were reunited. So we are, again, trying to continue that role in family reunification, and so we continue that work today. And what is some of the motivation behind this is actually our leader, CEO Krish Vignaraja, whose own story is a refugee story. It was about 2 years ago now, on Easter, Krish was coming out of Easter services only to learn of the cold-blooded killing of people that were simply praying. She did something we hope all of you never have to do. She called her aunt and cousin back in Sri Lanka to make sure they were alive. You see, Krish and her parents, when she was 9 months old and her brother was 3, fled Sri Lanka during the Civil War in the late 80s. They were all set to go to Nigeria. That's where the UN High Commission on Refugees had said that they were going to go, but at the last minute, they got a visa to come to the United States, to come to Baltimore. And they settled in Baltimore. Her parents were both educators. Her father eventually became the principal and then superintendent of the school district in Baltimore. Education was truly, truly important to Krish's parents, to her family, to reestablish those kinds of meaningful ways to give back in community. Krish went on to Yale, graduated law school, Actually ran for governor of mayor one time, came in third. And she actually was then director of public policy for the Michelle Obama White House during the Obama administration. So she came to LIRS 3.5 years ago, invigorated to make sure that her story would be a story that many others could replicate, that would make a difference. And she thanked and continues to thank God that they were able to seek refuge in America. And her parents, who had come with no jobs and just $200, were able to provide for their family. So what are we doing during this time of COVID response? Some of the kinds of things that we continue to do is to make sure that we're continuing our advocacy is very important, continue to reunify, to check in with our refugee families, educating, and then providing emergency assistance through all this time. And so that is our continuing work. I thought it would be good to share a little story of our most recent, it was just a year ago right now that we started seeing Kabul in the news, right? We started seeing Afghanistan in the news. And we all know what resulted in terms of the fall of Kabul at the end of August a year ago. And when 76 to 80,000 refugees were then airlifted out of Kabul to military bases around the United States, to what we call lily pad military bases before they were allowed to then come here. LIRS has resettled 14,000 of those 76,000 over the last really 6 months. And some of you, again, you experienced what this is about. But we also want to respond in part to the need that we knew that refugees also needed jobs. There is a large Afghan community in the Northern Virginia, Greater DC area, and so we knew that Fort Lee also was receiving a lot of the Afghan refugees, and so we intentionally opened an office in Northern Virginia, and now employ up to 30 Afghan refugees, some of them straight off of the military bases. And so let's listen to their story.
When I got here as a refugee, I had many questions and no answers. LIRS helped me on my first day. I remember when I went to the office, it was at the Alexandria NCA, and the first question I asked is there any way that I can help? I was surprising you hired, and I was so excited. I have to do my best to reach the families, and the best part of the job is that I know the language.
When I was a child, so I was so much into education, into learning, but I never remember a time where I could go to school with a peaceful mind and focusing on my learnings. There was always an incident, missiles hit at school. I felt like it's normal. Life is like this for everyone. And that's why I decided to leave Afghanistan so that I can have a better future for my son. I am very much excited about this work. It's a platform for me to help and assist my own people.
12 years I was in the military as a company interpreter. War is horrible, and I moved to war, and I lost my friends in war. When you move to a different country, you have a lot of different things in your mind because you're still learning. And that's one of the reasons that I started working with the resettlement agencies, because I've been through that road, and I wanted to share my experience with my Afghan brothers and sisters that they moved in a horrible situation from Afghanistan in evacuation. And we show the world, as an Americans, what we can do to support those in need, and we're still doing it.
Try our best to put them on ease and say we're here for you, that you don't have to worry about anything.
I feel great that I'm showing to the new Afghan arrivals that what America is about.
Right now in the United States, it's all about resettling Afghan refugees. So it's the biggest work. So when you do a big work with a great resettlement agency, that is what makes you feel fulfilled.
I'd like to share just a very brief story. During the resettlement of the Afghan refugees in this last year, there were lots of people who started to raise their hand and saying, we want to help. People that LRS has never heard from before. We had an incredible amount of military personnel who were contacting us, and some actually in Germany who were stationed there. And I remember this one story where the woman had sent a very significant donation, and she said, we're helping right now getting the people from Afghanistan to the other military bases in the U.S., but we know that the work that you are going to be doing is the harder work. We're giving out toothbrushes, we're giving out deodorant, we're giving out those kinds of essentials, but you'll be doing the long-term work. And because I had emailed and said, thank you for this incredible online donation that they had given. She goes, and I was raised Lutheran. And so there was these incredible connections. But the one story that I thought in terms of how it impacts generationally was a story that came up last September. I got an email from the Southeast Asian Broadcasting Company based out of Los Angeles. And this is the largest Southeast Asian broadcasting company, not only to Southeast Asians here in this country, but actually back in Vietnam, in Thailand, in all of Southeast Asia. And they said, we would like to do a telethon. Remember the Jerry Lewis telethons? Okay, like a telethon. And they said, we've chosen you and an Afghan organization here in Los Angeles that we'd like to raise funds for. And normally if we do one of these, telethons, we raise about $100,000. And of course, I'm saying, yes, by all means, yes. and anyway, they had set the date for the telethon, and it was a combination of like Afghan music, Southeast Asian music, different kinds of speakers on this one Sunday afternoon. And not only did they raise $100,000, they raised $200,000 from people raising their hand across the board. And one of the donors, one of the people who supported this endeavor was a gentleman from San Jose, California. And when asked why he gave a $30,000 donation, he said, because my family was resettled from Vietnam by St. Paul's Lutheran Church. And so it was those kinds of connections that happen generationally, they live on. And he was paying it forward for this next crisis in the U.S. So we certainly know that the Ukrainian crisis is ongoing. Just a little bit about some of our work right now here with resettling Ukrainians.
Было особенно страшно, когда они жили в Ирпене, город такой, что они в подвале сидели с детками. У меня такое, я так переживала, мой муж и все. Я ночью лежала и плакала. Кого мы ждем? Самых дорогих. Без слез не могу. Нам, благодаря вот сотрудникам АСЭТРИ, вот и УРИ, и любые вопросы мы обращались, никогда не было отказов.
They are regular refugees. They were found through the Lutheran program. They got in Cuba back in 2021. All the time on the phone with their mother who invited them here because they have to wait that long for the flights. I see there is email coming, flight is scheduled. There was so much joy. I felt like it's my sisters coming here.
говорится, что мы уже тут на месте.
Это как вот, когда война началась, первый день учителя. А быть такого не было. Ну как это война
Чтобы
началась?
понять, мы думали, это за 3 дня как-то закончится и все. Ну, мы, конечно, первое мечтали, чтобы дети наши больше не столкнулись с войной, потому что вот там, такие маленькие уже ощутили, что такое война, услышали. А тут хотелось бы, чтобы наши дети получили хорошее образование, создали хорошие крепкие семьи и были счастливыми гражданами Америки.
Чтобы они были свободными. Вот.
In all of these situations, we know that there are services that are lacking from what we would like to see as a very holistic resettlement and a vibrant refugee resettlement kind of system that has become so broken here in the United States over the last number of years. It's been needing that kind of a fix for a long, long time. So where is our vision going forward? 2 things that I want to highlight for you today is that we believe strongly in what we are now calling the New American Cities Project. That's not necessarily the large urban areas like New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, San Francisco, but cities like Rochester, like Winona, like Mankato, like Northfield, where we think that there is vibrancy in terms of pathways to building community. That again, this is where maybe even better jobs are located rather than in some of the urban areas. We think that there are more community kinds of connections. And we think that there are more holistic kinds of things that can be put in place. We know one of the biggest issues for not only our Afghan allies and families and individuals and for any of the Ukrainians, but also for those coming across at the southern border is the need for mental health counseling. The need for those kinds of services that are so very important for a successful kind of living again. When you fear that you're dying, when you fear that your life will be taken away at any possible moment, that to come and to experience that you're not living in war anymore, you're not living in that military zone. So mental health counseling, the access to appropriate and fast-acting legal kinds of services. These kinds of wraparound services can oftentimes happen better in smaller communities. And so we're calling this New American Cities, and it's our goal to make this happen. We're starting with some pilot projects around the country. This is also dependent upon private funding. This is not going to come from government contracts until we can prove that this is a better model and that the government should watch what LIRS is doing, which by fact, it's interesting. During the last year and a half, the Biden administration, though they don't listen to everything we say, we wish they would, but they have been watching what our successes have been and are keen on that. The other place that we like to really emphasize is welcome centers, and again, sort of that one-stop shopping in places where you don't have to travel, from one end of an urban city to another end to make sure that people can access those kinds of things, including emergency needs, including food and access to medical care. That's a really important piece. So welcome centers, again, refugee families resettling benefit from a robust system that is national in scale but local in its approach and access. And so we believe that everyone, regardless of status, should be welcomed with dignity and open arms. And that's one of the things that, again, you probably have experienced here in your communities. It's that idea of who gets the status of being welcomed and who has to, in terms of, I'll use Afghanistan. So some came with SIV, Special Immigrant Visa, SIV status. That's the gold card. That's like the I don't know, housekeeping, seal of approval. You get ready access to jobs and to education, all those kinds of things. But a large majority came as humanitarian parolees. That was the name that it's called. In other words, asylum seeker. And that does not guarantee you a right to a job. In fact, right now we're very, we're pushing strongly what we call the Afghan Advocacy Act, AAA, that there is a pathway. There's a pathway for Afghans for all Afghans to have this clear pathway towards citizenship. We're also advocating that for people coming across the southern border. These are huge issues that we take a very strong stand on. So I do want to give my colleagues some time on just some of the things that you can be involved with. Talk about why immigration is important. Spread the word to neighbors. Again, having this meal is a wonderful way of helping to spread the news of immigrant and businesses and how we can talk those up. Talk to representatives. World Refugee Day, June 21st this last year. Strong push for advocacy both on local and federal kinds of levels. You can get involved. Go to our website. You can see all kinds of ways that you can be a part of that. Migrant and Refugee Sunday. We've got toolkits. We've got Hope for the Holidays. Somebody said they were involved with Hope for the Holiday cards. And this is cards and letters to children and or parents that are in detention centers, that are still in detention centers, helping them to know that they have a word of love, helping them to know that people do care. Our program that ramps up usually beginning in October. Stand Up, Speak Up. Gather this year. These resources are going to be focused on Guatemala and all kinds of ways that you can become involved. So we encourage you to do that. If you aren't already signed up for advocacy or you can go to our website. I also have little cards at that table you can sign. And please, these Compassion Love, cool story. I got an email from a couple, actually they're here in Minnesota, and they were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. Their children were making them celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. And they said, we love LIRS. You are part of our special, we give very specifically to you. During our anniversary celebration, could you make up some cards for us? We want to highlight LRS at our anniversary celebration that our children are making us have. And so anyway, we had these little cards available and set these out. This couple, they said, not only will we make another donation, but we think we've got maybe 4 or 5 other families now that want to be involved with LIRS. And so, there's all kinds of ways to help spread the word, help talk about this. So without further ado, Theron, I'd love to introduce you to speak a little bit about the foundation and our partnership together.
Thanks, Beth. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Theron Leopold, and I serve as the charitable gift planner for the ELCA Foundation, serving the Southeastern Minnesota Synod, and I get to work hand in hand with Reverend Emily Carson and Kathy as well, and all the Synod staff. So just wonderful to be here and be part of this as well today. The work that we do as gift planners, there are 23 of us across the United States, each serving multiple synods, ELCA synods across the U.S. And the work that we do is exclusively planned gifts, legacy gifts, I like to call them. And so we work with ELCA members to help them think about their passions, where those passions lie. It might be LIRS, it might be the Southeastern Minnesota Synod, their congregation, their home congregation, campus ministry, whatever the donor's intent is. And so our work as gift planners is to help an individual and couple think about those passions as well as what is the best asset to make the best gift to the best organizations. And so really that's what our work focuses on. And so I just wanted to briefly mention that if you have named LIRS or the Southeastern Minnesota Synod as part of your estate plan, that could be something as simple as a beneficiary designation of a life insurance policy or a retirement account. Or if you want to explore something more in depth and you maybe haven't started creating a legacy plan yet too, I would welcome to have a conversation with you. I live in Faribault, so I cover the Southeastern Minnesota Synod. Glad to have coffee and a conversation with you more to learn about where your passions lie and how I can best assist you in creating your legacy plan. So I'm glad to be here today, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy and let Kathy talk about Amparo a little bit.
Thanks, Theron and Beth. Each time I listen to Beth, and I have a privilege over these next few days to hear her presentation 4 times. And some people say, wow, 4 times, what? No, Beth, I learned something new each and every time. Today, what one of the things that connected for me is one of her first slides. I don't know if you remember, but in the 1990s, she highlights Sudan. And I remember probably about 5 years ago, so about a year into this position, one of our South Sudanese sisters in our synod, I said, why the Lutheran Church? Because I looked around and knowing South Sudan, other than now the new Juba Center and in Gambela, Ethiopia, where the refugees are, and Pastor Wal Reed is missionary, there are no Lutherans in that area of the world. So why the Lutherans? And what I heard was, when we came in the 1990s as lost boys, as lost girls, it was the Lutheran Church who welcomed us. And with that slide, yes, it was the Lutheran Church through LIRS. What powerful, powerful ministry. And there's so many connections. But I'm just going to take 10 minutes with the Amparo Ministry. The Amparo Ministry started 6 years ago at the Churchwide Assembly, and next week, 24 people are traveling from the Synod to take part in Churchwide Assembly to make decisions for the church. Please pray for the people as different resolutions come up and different elections, for the Spirit to give wisdom and provide direction, because this is where this ministry started. Amparo is an acronym for Accompanying Migrant Minors with Protection, Advocacy, Representation, and Opportunities. A very empowered and enthusiastic and committed layperson brought this back from Synod Assembly in 2016, and a very small group of pastors, this layperson and I gathered, and we started mapping out an Amparo ministry, which then kind of screeched to not a halt, but just faltering steps with the election. And as you remember, with the election in 2016, there was great division in our country and great division within our congregations. And it was then in the summer of 2018, with the reports of the children being separated from their parents at the US-Mexico border, that there were 2 congregations, very small, very rural congregations, who connected and said, what are we doing as a synod? What are we doing as, these 120,000 or some people within our synod to address this? And that's where our calling was then. What are we doing with reunification, which we can't do on a synod level, but what could we do? And that's where the Amparo ministry really took off. And I relate and work with 6 different major ministries in my position as assistant to Bishop Regina Hassanelli, who, by the way, I should have started with, says hi and greets you. And this is the ministry that I would say has just grown exponentially over these past few years. So usually I take about an hour for an overview. You're going to get 10 minutes. Just a few brief highlights. Some of the parts of the Southeastern Minnesota Synod Amparo Ministry, one of the things is focusing on the sponsorship of refugee and/or asylum seekers, and we walk with congregations as they begin to discern. And I've walked with a couple individuals who approach and say, I have a room in my basement, and we talk through things. Discernment can be a conversation or can be a months-long process, whatever the congregation needs. Also, the connection placement opportunities, especially through our partners at the U.S.-Mexico border, Border Servant Corps in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Annunciation House in El Paso, Texas. And then we walk with the congregation and, if possible, the person who is seeking asylum or is a refugee during their time here in southeastern Minnesota. And there are many education opportunities. One of them is a Migrant Journey interactive experience. This is based on an ELCA experience that was introduced at the youth gathering several years ago. During the pandemic, took that, rewrote it to fit junior high age kids, and which then fits adults as well, right? And have this available. It's interactive. You, people in your congregation, take on roles of first the decision whether or not to leave your beloved community in Honduras or El Salvador, Guatemala, and then the journey north and who do they meet and interaction, and then there are questions, and we scripture comes up as well with this. If you're interested in this, let me know. To date, 15 congregations have taken part in this, and it can be a community event. There is a community we're working with now to bring it to not just a congregation, not just a group of congregations, but the wider community. Another opportunity is the God Who Sees book study. This is a book 2 years ago. LIRS in the summer had lunch and learns where you would read a book or not, and you would attend a webinar, 45 minutes to an hour, once a week, and hear an author being interviewed. Of the 4 books, 2 really resonated with me, and this is one of them. And the author does go into scripture and identify different refugees, because we are a people who wander. We are a people who migrate. And even in the Bible, think Abraham, Sarah, think Naomi, Ruth, and others, think Jesus. Anyway, the book study is set up either for congregations, small group, or we did a synod-wide one about a year ago. We also have a list of recommended books and webinars and other resources. See me if you're interested in that. And we put this together with our partners at the U.S.-Mexico border. Speaking of the border, an intriguing part for many people is a border visit, which, as many of you know, because some of you were listed saying, I want to go, and it was, yep, you're on a list. Then in March of 2020, all of the visits were canceled, but this is an opportunity to visit our partners at the U.S.-Mexico border and immerse yourself in the immigration process. We're now calling it Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 is for first-timers, people who have never been to the U.S.-Mexico border, haven't walked through the judicial system, Border Patrol. What else, Kathy? I'm trying to, Border Patrol, we did so many different, immigration attorneys, the faith aspect, social work, meeting people who live in our sister city in Ciudad Juarez, the sister city of El Paso, through the border wall and getting to know their community. And I should look at Emily. She also went on a border visit. Both Emily and Kathy have been on border visits, one in 2019, another in 2020. Tier 2 is something Kathy has done informally on vacation, but it's actually going for a week or 2 weeks and volunteering within an organization, whether Border Servant Corps or Annunciation House. It gets you more immersed in with immigration. Other education opportunities, different presentations, whether adult forums, preaching, temple talks, whether it's about the Amparo ministry, immigration policy and practice, which changes on a dime and is impacted by which administration, but it hasn't changed much over the last couple of years. Border visits, and as Beth said, it is broken. The border visits, and again, the migrant journey, other educational opportunities. Other resources, we put together a book of resources for across the synod, whether someone lives in Winona or Mankato, Fairmont, Northfield, wherever someone lives, they'll get some resources that they can connect people in their community with. Welcoming Congregations Network. If you identify yourself as a congregation that welcomes the stranger, welcomes the refugee, welcomes all neighbors, you can be part of this. And periodically, 4 times a year, we gather via Zoom and just have conversation and hear a speaker. Local partnerships, including Smiled here in Rochester area, and southeastern Minnesota now, conversation with friends and others, many partners. Advocacy, Beth talked about that a little bit, and we're also a connector to the national partners, whether LIRS or the ELCA, or you can just put fill in the blank. And many of these ministries were created because of questions you asked or situations you have encountered within your community, and trying to fill a need, trying to partner. So if you have a situation, don't hesitate to call. Just have a conversation and we can see what comes out of it. In fact, after the Best American Cities, in Winona, just this morning we were in Winona, a few people came up to me and said, can we have a conversation about that? We're really interested in this. Yep, we can do that, and then connect with Beth. And as you can be a financial partner with LIRS, you can also with the Southeastern Minnesota Synod. The funds you give to the Synod, 100% will go to the ministry itself, and some of the uses of those funds is about 4 times a year. We purchase essential supplies for children who are at the U.S.-Mexico border in the shelters. So things like socks and shoes, and today I picked up about the shoes. Shoelaces. Yeah, because there aren't shoelaces, didn't know that. Toothbrushes, other things like that. For food ministry, organization or congregation here, and I see Sue Benson in the room. There are one of the congregations in Lake City connects with teenagers who are, and Beth, could you repeat that for me? We say migrant minors. You say
unaccompanied refugee minors.
Unaccompanied refugee minors. I like that. Yeah, URMs. They accompany unaccompanied refugee minors. And one of the things that Sue recognized were these unaccompanied refugee minors in the high school were not eating breakfast in the morning. And because of their jobs, they couldn't have breakfast in the morning, take advantage of the free breakfast. And so this $500 food ministry grant, which theirs came from Amparo funds, are going to provide breakfast and snacks for kids who are hungry.
Thank you.
And I think in your presentation today, it was up there, but let's read this together. I think Micah 6:8 is so powerful, and that's a lot of who we are called. So what does the Lord require of you?
To do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with God.
We're going to open it up now for questions or to tell what's happening here in the Rochester area. We heard just a little bit through me about Lake City, but Sue, if you wanted to share for anyone else, we heard some about the sponsorship of Afghan refugees. Anybody have a question or want to share?
We have a need for housing for our young people. I've personally been asked twice to become a legal guardian within the last 12 months for different kids. I mean, it just rips your heart kind of, and they don't have safe places to live. They do have a connection, but it's not a healthy, safe one. Let's just say, you know, and so we all know similar situations, but that's the biggest tug in Lake City, our kids that don't have answers.
Bill, you were going to say?
If I could just 2 minutes about SMILE. Southeastern Minnesota Interfaith Immigrant Legal Defense provides legal representation through the immigrant justice, so-called justice system, for people who live or work in southeastern Minnesota, 11 counties, through contracts with Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota and Advocates for Human Rights. We started in 2019 and have raised all of our money goes exactly to representation. Your chances of succeeding in not being removed are 3% if you remain in detention and don't have an attorney, and 74% if you have an attorney and can get out of detention. We take nearly all cases. If you have a snowball's chance of succeeding, we'll take your case. We've taken all of the eligible people over the last year, and we're keeping going. We are entirely supported by donations from individuals and faith communities in our region. So that's our blurb. And thanks for inviting me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other ministries you want to highlight? Community initiatives you want to highlight? Questions?
I have a question for staff, just because so the local administrator is Catholic Charities, but I know that there's some collaboration or relationship there. Could you explain how that works?
I'll do my best. Okay. So as I mentioned, there are 9 refugee agencies recognized by the U.S. State Department. I don't think it's a lottery, but there is some sort of there's an algorithm as to who serves in what area, which one, the refugee agencies. And I think this is Catholic Charities for the most part. LRS can be a companion. I wouldn't call us an accompaniment, but we can be a companion along with whoever is assigned. We have partners and affiliates in 39 states across the United States where we are the primary, okay? So it depends on maybe some historical kinds of connections that might have taken place. And so that's, we try not to usurp what's already there established. However, I'll use Illinois as an example, my home state. We used to have, LRS had the connection with Refugee One in Chicago, and then Refugee One is now with the IRC, which is another one of the refugee resettlement agencies. So we're, I think, and again, it wasn't because anything happened that was contrary. It was a better fit for some of their work as a local partner, a local affiliate. But that's why, again, we're looking beyond that. We're looking beyond what the traditional U.S. government has put in place, because it's not working in all cases. It's just not working. And so that's why we're looking at New American Cities. That's why we're looking at welcome centers. That's why we're looking, where can we be a part of local fabric that we haven't been a part of before? Or how do we utilize what the local community, you all know probably much more than than many people in terms of what works in your community. Who are the employers? Who are the? I was highlighting somewhere along the way. There's a, again, looking at HS4 in terms of getting status for migrant populations, in terms of work permits, in terms of all those kinds of things. The U.S. dairy farmers, in particular, are supporting this bill, whereas the Farm Bureau is not. And so it's just an interesting. So what works in your communities? And I think that when I look at again some of the historical kinds of things, we know that there are employment kinds of things that we need to be advocating for in conjunction with what you might. So I'm rambling on about, but it's different connections at different places. And again, that fabric changes. It depends on funding as well. During the last administration, there were so many of our partners and affiliates that just bottomed out because there was no funding. There was nothing there, and so they had to lay off hundreds, if not thousands, of staffers across the United States. And so that the reemergence, who was able to maybe reemerge more quickly than others. So that's, I don't know if that's a good explanation, but that's the best I know. Good question. Again, we're so empowered by what you all are doing, and I would love to hear, we'd love to continue hearing more stories, how we can continue to connect, how you can continue to tell this story. All of the videos that we shared today, they're at our site. You can use those in your church, faith community, and your interfaith work. And please feel free to share those stories widely. And I think this is being recorded, right? Yes. And I left the camera. Sorry. Hi. But yeah, in terms of how we can continue to do this work together. So any last minute kinds of highlights? We're available. We'll be here for a few minutes, to talk. Yes. So
our church is involved in sponsoring an Afghan refugee family as well as a Nicaraguan asylum. And the contrast in support is really stark. I'm wondering how many Lutheran congregations have gone through this discernment process and what they've learned.
Yeah, it's a good comment, and maybe Kath, you want to interject it, but I'll have to tell you one of the things that we're very, very adamant about, and you can see our CEO Krish is on media all the time talking about the racial inequity of what's happening at the border right now. Why did they get across when others did not? And so there are those kinds of issues that really we do have to address. We have to address systemically as well as in each local case. But yeah, Kathy, I'll let you respond as well. So.
And some people in this room can respond as well, because I know that congregations within Rochester sponsored, and as Pastor Carl said, sponsored Afghan refugees and possibly others. That was part of the ministry, right, of congregations. The congregations I've walked with in Winona, as it was probably a 6-month-long process, and one of the things we were looking into was who is our connector agency, and we found out LRS and LSS are not. If we lived in Mankato and there was a family member, yep, we could go through LSS, but Winona and Mankato are 150 or so miles away from one another, and so it was Catholic Charities if we were going to, if they were going to sponsor a Afghan refugee. If it was an asylum seeker, it's totally independent. Right. And that's what they chose to do because of the Synod's relationship because of the border visits and the relationship, the Synod's relationship with Border Servant Corps and Annunciation House. In that research, we found the stark difference, as you said. Someone who enters the country seeking asylum has pretty much zero federal, state, local benefits. Through their work, people in Winona did find some medical assistance, some other support. Afghan refugees, especially a little later on in the process over the summer, because at first they were in the same situation, and then it was tiered, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and they kept changing the names of the tiers. They finally landed that the majority of people from Afghanistan would receive federal and state or state support, financial support, including jobs. The Ukraine people at first, no financial support, and then at the beginning of June, that shifted. So it just really depends, and a lot of it depends on where in the world you're emigrating from. Where are you fleeing from? Because the situation and I just showed 3 countries. There are many countries where people are fleeing, but the 3, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, people's lives are threatened. People are leaving not because, wow, America looks like a great place to live. We heard there's this welfare in Minnesota, all the words, all the lines. It's because their lives have been threatened. And they need to leave, just as the Afghan people and the Ukrainian people need to flee their land. It's never an easy decision. And even the South Sudanese who have been here for how many years now? Many of you know this more than me. Probably 25, 30 years, right? Almost to a person, if they're over the age of 35, they say, our desire is to be back home. Yeah. People leave because, for life.
And let's not forget about climate change and climate refugees, which is really happening internally here in the United States as well as around the world. That will be, and it is really right now, a current issue for those of us at LRS as we are looking at what that will mean an impact in days and months and years to come as well. So we don't want to leave on a bleak note, though. We want to leave with hope, and that hope emanates from your presence here today, as well as what each of you are doing literally day by day. Continue to pray. Continue to support local, regional, national ways that you can. That's not always financial support, but it's also advocating. It's also talking about what those issues mean. And make it part of every family gathering you have. Sorry, I just had to do that. So Pastor Carl Eric, thank you, to Good Shepherd, for the amazing meal. And we go in peace, right?
And take action.
Yeah, and take action. And we all say, thanks be to God.
In hope.